Right, good evening. This is Sunday Sport. Now, of course, the list of the best ever players across sporting codes is a favourite of fans all over the world. For example, the best batsman of all time or the best bowlers in the world of cricket. And we do see the same with football. Now, these always spark debate among fans. This evening, Luke Upton is an author of a book titled Men of Rugby, listing some of the toughest rugby players to have ever played the game. He does join us this evening via Zoom. Before we get to him, we do have the resident, Liam Dalcom, joining us as well, senior sports writer from the Sunday Times. My name is Nicole Kente. I'm standing in for Tony Ndoro. Liam, let's start with you. How are you doing this evening?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Good, good, good. How's the baby?
Baby's fine.
How does it feel being a new dad now?
It's, as you say, it's new. So I'm growing into it as she's growing.
Are you still finding your feet?
Yeah.
That's good to hear. Now, Luke, thank you so much for joining us all the way from the UK. Thank you for making the time. And I'm quite interested to know about this book of yours. Tell our viewers a bit about the book. You've titled it The Hard Men of Rugby. Tell us also why specifically that title.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you very much for welcoming me to your show. As you said, there's a lot of debate about this kind of thing. Lists of sporting bests or worsts or hardest are always hard to really really to get everyone to agree on. But yeah, this is a rundown of 20 of the hardest players ever to play rugby, stretching back from before World War I. Right up to the present day, so covering I think 12 or 13 different countries, lots of different eras, and it's an interesting mix. Some of the names will be familiar to people, some of them are a little less well known. So it's been nice bringing those to the forefront of rugby fans' imaginations. Now,
Luke, you've listed 20 in the book, and everybody who's familiar with rugby, there are very many thousands of rugby players in the world. So how exactly did you decide on the 20 names that you listed? And I'm quite interested to know about Bakkies Botha. I mean, Bakkies was termed a thug, a dirty player as well at some point. So how did you decide to also add him to that list?
It's a good question, and I can't tell you there was a science or an algorithm behind selecting the 20. I mean, I looked for two great ways of looking at it. One, they had to be hard and tough. So whether that's kind of physical hardness or mental toughness, but they also had to be very good players as well. So kind of mindless thugs who never really made it weren't included. And then I looked at the great stories behind some of these men as well. So a lot of them were from the amateur era, so they had jobs. Some of them served in world wars, some of them were policemen, farmers. There's great stories behind them as well. But when it came to South Africa, naturally, there's an amazing history of rugby in South Africa, and I could have done 20 players from the country in there really. But I went for Bakkies. I'm a Welsh fan, so I saw him on the pitch. He used to destroy Wales quite regularly back in the day when he was playing. I'd always been interested in him as a player, and obviously seeing him in France as well. So he was the South African representative, and I reached out to him on Twitter. Had a bit of an exchange, and then set up quite a good interview with him. So we had a really good chat all about his career, all about his time in South Africa with the Springboks, but also in France, and a bit about his reputation as well. As you said, he's he admits himself he was no angel on the pitch, and he is a little bit divisive. Some people don't think think of him as a bit of a thug, but I think of him as a great player who perhaps did sometimes step over the line a little bit.
The criteria I find fascinating, because if you see a title like that, you obviously wonder, how do you arrive at 20 to make that list? Because also across the ages, what do you use as a yardstick? You can't say because that player got 7 red cards in test matches, or he has served a total of, for argument's sake, 34 weeks. He's been banned or whatever. So, I mean, the criteria, as Luke explained, is actually quite important. I want to ask you, Luke, though, who was the 21st player, the player that's probably the unluckiest player that didn't make your book?
It's a good question. Well, I'm sort of trying to take the players as a bit of a whole, so factoring in their playing, but also a little bit about their sort of personality. There was a recent Canadian player, I think he's still playing in the lower end of the French leagues, but called Jamie Cudmore. He played for Canada at a couple of World Cups. But he actually, and he's quite open about this, he was a real bad boy when he was a youngster, and ended up being, well, for want of a better word, a sort of enforcer for a local drug dealer. And then he kind of changed his ways and found rugby. Always a bit of a live wire on the pitch, but yeah, an interesting guy. But yeah, there were lots. I mean, if we're looking at South Africa, I think Eben Etzebeth would have been good on there. He may have been in number 22.
Now, Luke, you did mention that you spoke to Bucky's Berta prior to writing this book. 20 players from across the world. Have you actually talked to all of them before writing this book?
No, sadly. I mean, some of them are no longer with us, unfortunately. Some of them I did speak to. So Brian Lima, that you'll be familiar with, the Samoan great. So I had a really good discussion with him. I actually spoke to another South African who is not one of the featured players, but he's mentioned in the Lima book, is Derek Hugard. As I'm sure you'll remember, he was hit with a fearsome tackle by Lima in a couple of World Cups ago, and it's a bit of a YouTube sensation. So it was great to get his memory of that tackle and Lima's. I also spoke to some teammates of players who are no longer with us. So Jerry Collins, the late New Zealand great. I spoke to Lee Byrne, who played with him at the Ospreys. So I spoke to people who kind of played with people, even if they weren't able to contribute. And then going further back, then I did sort of research through newspapers and magazines and contemporary things like that. The oldest player in the book played for Scotland in the 1910s. So really did have to go back into the archives to find out about him.
The scary thing about the Brian Lima tackle was if you saw it on television and if you sort of closed your eyes at the prospect of him colliding with Hougaard, if you were at the stadium, it was 10 times worse because then you were able to see where Lima started his run from. It felt like the neighboring suburb as he sort of marked him and went for him, because obviously on television you were obviously confined by just what the camera showed you.
100%. I mean, you're right there, it's a complete difference, and, these rugby players are really formidable, quite fantastic. Now, Luke, talk to us about the Frenchman on the cover. How did you specifically decide only one player on the cover, and why particularly him?
Well, interesting question. So Sebastian Chabal is on our cover, the caveman, so an incredibly distinctive looking man with the beard and the hair. And there's two other Frenchmen in the book, Armand Vacarin from the 80s and Gérard Chollet from the 60s and 70s. And I think Chabal is very interesting because, no offense to Chabal, and I wouldn't say this to his face, but I think he's probably the least hard of the 20, but he's a very modern hard man in that the image is very important. And YouTube and advertising and social media has been very important to his reputation. So we wanted to put him in there as a bit of a different kind of hard man. Still a tough player, of course, and there's some big moments in his career, but he's just so distinctive as well. I mean, no one else looks like him, and I didn't realize this until I did the chapter on him, that he used to have a short back and sides, a very sort of ordinary look, and he was clean shaven, and you wouldn't recognize him from the photos. But when his wife was pregnant with their first child, he said, I'm not going to shave or cut my hair till the baby's born, and the baby was born, and it was quite long and quite hirsute. And he kept it. His wife gave him the permission to keep it, and his career sort of zoomed off from there, and everyone always knew him at that. So, yeah, his career really took off when he changed his image.
You weren't tempted to include Mark Sessio at Chabal's expense?
No, I wouldn't make any of those things weren't him.
Now, Luke, quickly, before we let you go, you've just mentioned a few social media platforms. I'm quite interested to know how well the book was received.
Yeah, very good indeed. It's been interesting because we've had a lot of stories about it, good media coverage, and a lot of people telling me who should be in there and who shouldn't be in there. And it's not meant as a definitive list. You could never do that. If you did, you'd probably have about 10 Frenchmen from the 1970s because they were something else. But yeah, really good response to it. I mean, it's great stories that I've looked for, and some of them, as I've said, the first person. Paddy Mayne, fantastic player for Ireland and the Lions, and he had a very eventful tour to South Africa in the 30s. But he was a founder member of the SAS, the kind of elite British army unit in World War II. Some of the things he did in the war were amazing. So some of these guys, you have the rugby, the on-the-pitch stuff, but particularly in the amateur era, some of the off-the-field antics were as lively and as wild as some of the on-the-pitch stuff. And of course, a lot of the things that people did back then in rugby, you couldn't get away with now, either on or off the pitch, with video phones and sighting commissioners. It's a very different game now. And Bakkies actually admits that in the chapter, that he'd be a different player if he was starting his career now than if he'd finished it a few years ago.
Things do definitely change over the years. Luke, thank you so much for making the time to chat with us this evening. The hard men of rugby. Rugby is my first love, Liam, so I'm definitely looking forward to. I know you think it's cricket, but it's not. I'm definitely looking forward. I'm definitely looking forward to getting into this book. There you have it, everybody. The Hard Men of Rugby, and we'll leave it there for now. So that's a look at the list of some of the toughest players in the world of rugby. Coming up, we take a look at the downside of the sport and its physical impact on rugby players. Stay with us. Dr. Patricios.
Yes, good evening to you.
Good evening. How are you?
Fine, thank you, and you?
I'm doing very well. My name is Nicole. We'll be coming to you shortly.
Great, thank you, Nicole.
Awesome. My earpiece. So you can't hear a thing.